Do we really need to rewind all the way to 1958, 65 years ago, for the greatest game ever? I'm sure plenty of games come to mind first. The Patriots vs Falcons Super Bowl, the Ice Bowl, Super Bowl 43 with the Steelers against the Cardinals. Well, in fact, it's the 1958 NFL Championship. I guess greatest game is subjective, but it is the game that is widely held to take that crown. So this is what is known as the greatest game in NFL history and why it got that title. The 1958 NFL Championship was played on December 28th, 1958 at Yankee Stadium in New York. It was the first overtime game in pro football history, one of the first NFL games broadcast nationally, and an incredible bunch of football legends on the field and the sidelines. Many of the viewers just beginning to tune in were not regular watchers of pro football, and they were seeing something starkly different than the traditional college games played on sunny autumn afternoons, author Mark Bowden wrote in his 2008 book. In 1958, the NFL was not the powerhouse we see today. Baseball was America's primary sport, and college football dominated Saturdays. There were a lot of factors that came together to make this a perfect recipe for the greatest game ever, but before we jump into those factors, let's talk about the game. Both teams had finished the 1958 season with a 9-3 record. The New York Giants had been winning for 5 straight years, so they were good, and even took home the NFL championship in 1956. The same was not true for the Baltimore Colts though. That's right, we've gone so far back, the Colts were in Baltimore. 1958 was only their second winning season since they started playing in 1953. And the Colts started the season hot. They won their first 6 games, but in week 7 they actually faced the Giants and lost 24-21. To be fair, their star quarterback Johnny Unitas was injured and didn't play that game. 3 weeks later, Unitas came back and led the Colts to a crazy comeback win against the 49ers. They were down 27-7 at halftime, and he answered with 4 touchdowns in a row to win 35-27, which clinched their spot in the championship game. New York's season started differently. They split the first 4 games, winning 2 and losing 2, but then caught fire, winning 7 of their last 8 games. One of their biggest wins was against the Detroit Lions. They had made a late game comeback and actually blocked a field goal to win 19-17. In the final game of the regular season, they beat the Cleveland Browns, which left those teams tied in the conference title. In the final game of the regular season, they beat the Cleveland Browns, and it left those 2 teams tied for the conference title. That meant that the Giants and Browns had to play a tiebreaker game. The Giants won 10-0, securing their spot in the championship game. And so the stage was set for what would become known as the greatest game ever played. 12 Hall of Famers were in the stadium that afternoon, not to mention coaches on the sideline. Over 64,000 fans in attendance. 45 million people tuned in on their TV. The Colts were led by Johnny Unitas and Heisman Trophy winner running back Alan Ameche. The New York offense revolved around halfback Frank Gifford, while linebacker Sam Huff anchored the defense. It was described as a somewhat sloppy game, and that was because there were a combined 6 turnovers in the first half, 3 on each side. The Colts were able to convert 2 fumbles by the Giants into touchdown drives, and that meant they had a 14-3 lead at halftime. Early in the third quarter, the Colts were just 1 yard away from scoring, but back-to-back stops on 3rd and 4th down gave the Giants the ball back, and this was a huge momentum shift. The Giants then drove 95 yards in just 4 plays and cut the Colts' lead to 14-10. The drive was highlighted by an unforgettable 86-yard pass play. Giants quarterback Charlie Connolly threw to Charles Rote, who broke a tackle at midfield. Rote fumbled at the Colts' 25-yard line, but his teammate Alex Webster picked it up and ran it to the 1-yard line before being knocked out of bounds. Shortly after, the Giants were able to take a 17-14 lead early in the 4th quarter with a 15-yard touchdown pass to Frank Gifford. The Colts then had 2 chances to score, but failed both times. They missed a 46-yard field goal, then recovered a fumble, drove down to the Giants' 27-yard line, but Unitas was sacked twice, which pushed them out of field goal range. With a little over 2 minutes left, they had one more chance. The Giants punted it on 4th down and pinned the Colts at their own 14-yard line. And it was here that Johnny Unitas led one of the most famous drives in football history. An 11-yard pass to Lenny Moore on 3rd down, 3 straight passes to Raymond Berry, and he moved the chains to the Giants' 13-yard line. With only 7 seconds left, a 20-yard field goal sent the game into sudden death overtime, the first in NFL playoff history. The Giants received, but went 3 and out, so it was the Colts' time to shine. Late into the Colts' game-winning drive, they were on the Giants' 8-yard line, and NBC, who were televising the game, lost their TV signal, with 45 million watchers about to miss the game-winning, legacy-defining play. While NBC decided to send in employee Stan Rockewitz, he ran onto the field and was chased by several police officers. Most just thought he was some drunk fan, but people did comment on how well he was dressed for a drunk person. It worked though, because only 1 play was missed. I don't know if this story has actually ever been confirmed true, but it seems like most are in agreement that it happened. Anyway, back to the game. The Colts had driven 80 yards in 13 plays, and it was sealed off by Ameche scoring a 1-yard touchdown, winning the game 23-17. So that's the awesome, scrappy game. But what makes it the greatest game ever? First thing is the history. It was the first overtime ever. Then Commissioner Burt Bell had convinced team owners just a few years earlier to adopt a sudden death format in the event of a tie in championship games. Without it, this game would have ended in a 17-17 tie, and it would have not had the impact it did. Unitas would later say that players had never heard of overtime prior to this game. Fans hadn't either, because it was reported that some left the stadium thinking the game had ended in a tie. Unitas said, "When the game ended in a tie, we were standing on the sideline waiting to see what came next. All of a sudden, the officials came over and said, 'Send the captain out. We're going to flip a coin to see who will receive.' That was the first we heard of the overtime period." Here's the other part of the history, the amazing coaches. The offensive coordinator for the Giants was Vince Lombardi, one of the greatest coaches of all time, whom the Super Bowl trophy is named after, and defensive coordinator for the Giants was Tom Landry, who later led the Dallas Cowboys to 20 consecutive winning seasons. So two of the greatest coaches of all time before they were even known. And then, as I mentioned, you had 12 Hall of Fame players, or people that were going to get inducted into the Hall of Fame, playing in that game. And here's the true historic significance of this game. The explosion of televisions in American households helped bring the sport to the masses. And what better game to promote the league? Football was on the rise in the 1950s, which timed perfectly with the rise of television, which was now in about 12 million American homes. By the middle of the 1960s, football had become the nation's favorite sport to watch, and it remains that way to this day. It had everything people wanted. It had timeouts, quarters, half times, you get the commercials in, you don't have to stop the action. It was perfect for television, and it still is. Television made pro football. It was almost made for television as opposed to other sports, and it was emerging. Both quotes from Frank Gifford. You also had the formation of the AFL in 1960. The popularity that had been building that decade, accelerated by this game, gave Texas billionaire Lamar Hunt the confirmation he needed to set up a competitor league to the NFL. So many point to this game as the start of football growing into the behemoth it is now. Colts receiver Ray Berry said after the game, "It's the greatest thing that ever happened." Alright, thanks for watching, and happy Independence Day.